Gonna move over there in just a minute. Don't be rushing the process.
So, all right, please finish up. Don't pray on my part.
Go ahead.
So, by my recollection, there are 15 chapters in this book. We're going to cover 7 and 8 today, so we're more than halfway through. So, what do you guys think?
I don't know. The other chapters must be bigger.
Well, there's a bunch of stuff in the back.
Yeah, it's got all the notes.
Buddy helps us.
Yes.
I think it's, the
Not
book is
mine.
getting better.
Well, a little bit, but that's only 3 or 4 pages. Other than that, it's that much. That's what we have left
Well, it
here, that's
says-
what we found.
Epilogue, taking
We're
the
about
Note, grandma, acknowledgement, study guide, notes.
Third of the way through.
But for the chapter purposes, we're almost halfway through.
I think it's, to me, these last week and this week, it's getting us more into where we need to be.
100%. And, you know, I think from the beginning, the first couple chapters, it said there's no quick fixes. And, you know, and that's where we're at. There, you know, there's no quick fixes. We got to be deliberate, diligent, and work at it. So one of the things that our class, that was in our class, I told Dottie she's doing an absolute phenomenal job herding cats. Because trying to get volunteers to come together for a purpose, and, you know, especially when we're trying to do something different than we have done before, an experiment, if you will, following the book, you know, that's hard. You know, because we're stepping kind of into the unknown from what we're used to. You know, we're used to doing a Thanksgiving dinner for the church. We're not used to opening up our church for a bunch of strangers and seeing what we can do. And so, and then Dottie's leading the charge, so I give her huge props, trying to herd the cats.
It's this whole group right here, not Dottie. They all are volunteering.
Well, and we're stepping out kind of into the unknown for us, which is really what we need to do. On that note, I did tell, if you didn't hear, so we've got tracks. I bought multiple. There's a couple adult tracks. There's a kid track for kids. So we have tracks that we can hand out. We have the Book of John that we can hand out. And so we have some resources. And for the folks that are going around and talking to people, you know, we'll have stuff that we can hand them and leave them with. So without further ado, I appreciate everybody. Like I said, always, you know, I think this is a hard subject to go over. You know, changing the church is scary. Changing what we normally do and have always done is scary. But, you know, just like we talked about in the first lesson, if we continue to do what we always do, we're going to get the same results we always got, and that's kind of the definition of insanity. So, you know, kind of we talked about the goals, book Bible study to explore how to meet our mission. You know, and our mission says we're going to evangelize our community. It says we're going to make disciples. And the goal is not to change Oak Ridge's Methodist core values. And, you know, and one of the things I thought about, well, for our group, that's really not that big of a deal. You know, if we were United Methodist, then that would be a big deal. Or if somebody from United Methodist came in, because that would go against our core values. Because our core values are the Bible. You know, it's the inherent, unapologetic Word of God, and it's without fault. So, you know, and if nothing goes against that, to me, that's our core value. Team effort. You know, just like we said, it's like keep praising God. It's a team effort. You know, we can't all do this on our own. This isn't might against the world. It's our entire church as a team. And then the goals grow closer to God, grow closer to the church family, find ways to meet our mission, which I think we've thrown out a bunch of ideas, and they're not hasty ideas and stuff we've diligently thought about and looked at some of the ideas and build up Oak Ridge. So one of the things I wanted to do is we'll take a green. So we talked about Thanksgiving community. So, you know, we've got this one going, so we can circle that.
Erase all that other stuff there.
It's all right. And we talked about it, and so what I did is I ordered some postcards that have a picture of the church on the front. In the back it says, "Welcome to our community. We'd love to have you visit our church." Had put the worship times on the thing, and then we can write them a little note. You can go on Zillow or any real estate thing and look at sold houses. We can look at the addresses, put their address on, put a handwritten note if we want, and we can, mail it. And so just a way to reach out to the community, just another way for these people wondering about churches. And so those are in the mail. Checks in the mail, they're not here yet, but they should be here. I believe they're in, I believe they're in the mail. I got a note that they're shipped, so they should
Well,
be.
another thing up there is ring the bell. That could be done, we could have already started that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I completely forgot about the bell.
Yeah, we need to designate someone to do that every Sunday morning.
Yeah. That is a great idea.
Well, we need to invite people who have smaller children to come see. We need to tell them we're having Santa Claus on the 14th,
Yeah.
because that is one of the greatest ways to get people in that's got small children.
Yeah. One of the things I forgot, and I was gonna ask, as far as advertising, what advertising has been done for the community fellowship, and what advertising do we need to do?
It's on Facebook.
It's on Facebook?
I put it on, the Oak Ridge Community Facebook page, What's Happening in Danville Neal Facebook page.
And what about fire
And I
station?
sent it to the fire station, no reply on that.
We need them to put something up now.
Yeah, I couldn't, you can't post to their page, so I sent a private message, but no reply. Let's see, Oak Ridge Community, What's Happening in Danville Neal. I'm not really sure, but just the local area is what I did.
Do we have it
I
on our
didn't-
sign out front?
I have it on the sign up out front. I did not put it, like, I was kind of afraid to put it in the What's Happening in Decatur or Hartselle. I was afraid we'd reach way too much, See how this one goes, and then we can go.
So I'll get a flyer printed off and give one to Oak Ridge Grocery Store,
Yeah,
because of all the people going in. And Mom, didn't you say there's like a homeless encampment about a mile away?
There's supposed to be a home, the biggest one ran from Decatur's right down the street this one. But they think you're not supposed to go in it. You can post things around it.
Well, I don't know.
It's not what, it's in, when you take a dip somewhere over there, I don't know. One of our ladies, they had to go over with the health department, and they've got a pretty rough crowd running it right now.
Is it by you mean right down here, like at the bridge?
It's
Oh,
like in the woods.
Yeah, but I mean, is it at the bridge?
I don't know.
Oh,
I
okay.
guess this lady works for the county, and they went in, but it is not safe to just go in. But she said, because I asked, how could we get the message in there? And they said, just take it and put it on a tree right up front, because you can see the paths somewhere over there.
a homeless camp.
But it's a big one over there. That-
So is-
Since they run them out of all those homes, that,
Uh-huh.
those places they run them out of, they're now in the woods.
Okay, is it between us and Hartselle or us and Decatur?
You and Decatur.
Okay.
Norris, no, maybe?
I didn't know that either, I didn't know that.
I only did it because I have a friend that's on that committee.
Yeah, well, that's good to know, we need to
See
know.
where it is,
Yeah.
if she tells a little more landmarks. and-
Okay, I'll tell her, give me the landmarks.
Yeah, I'll see if I can't track somebody down that might know. So anyway, all right, thank you. Sorry for the pregnant pause, but I wanted to make sure somebody was on top of that. I'm really glad that Tammy was. So, Canoeing the Mountains, Chapter 7, Navigating the Geography of Reality, and my name for the chapter is A New Paradigm. We're thinking about something totally different than we're used to. It's a new paradigm. And it's our reality now. It's a reality of post-Christendom where, people don't know about Christ and they've never learned about him. And we're going to talk quite a bit about Lewis and Clark today. But I think it's important on how they faced this changing geography that they weren't prepared At that moment in the daunting vista spread out at the feet of Meriwether Lewis, the dream of an easy water route across the continent, a dream stretching back to Christopher Columbus, was shattered. And I think about that. Think about if something we took as an inherent truth that we've grown up with, and then all of a sudden, we find out it was false. Something we believed in. And I'll give you, for instance, when I first got in the military, we trained for a war with Russia. Absolutely everything I did for the first 4 to 6 years of my military career was to train for a war with Russia. They're the bad guys. These guys are communists. We memorized their vehicles. We memorized everything about their vehicles. I could tell you what the vehicle looked like in the FLIR, and with just a picture, I could tell you how far it could shoot. Could tell you everything about that war. And then the wall fell in Germany, and all of a sudden, we didn't care about Russia anymore. It's like we were, my whole life I trained for this war with Russia, and then we don't, and I'm sure that's kind of how they felt. Here we've been told there's this water route, but we carried these canoes for, on foot for hundreds of miles, and we don't need them. And so I can just imagine, how, lesser men like say, okay, I'm done. I can't canoe this. This is what I signed up for. That moment atop the Lemhi Pass was when the geography of hope gave way to the geography of reality. A disappointing reality it must have been when a mental model dies, a painful paradigm shift takes place within us. It's disorienting and anxiety-making. That's the exact moment that the church faces today with the demise of Christendom and a changing topography of faith. In this new culture, a new missional mental model is needed. A new way of leading and learning is necessary. And I believe that's where we're at today. And that's why I believe, called to do these presentations and do this study, because as I was reading this book, Mike and I were doing this thing with Dirt Roads Network, and we were meeting with some other pastors, and he mentioned this book. And so, being the book nerd I am, I went and bought the book, and I was really impressed with the book, and it really changed how I looked at our area, and it made me understand a lot of things on why we're having such a problem getting people into the church. And that this whole mental model, growing up in church, I know when I grew up in church, in our area, even though it was Las Vegas, after my high school prom, a lot of my friends, 20 of my friends, came back to the church. We had a whole youth room. Nobody was drinking. We were playing the games, hanging out, watching movies, and doing stuff, because everybody knew church. Everybody knew that church was a safe place. But they don't know that now. A lot of these kids have absolutely no idea. And I think Mike brought it up last week, but one of the things that is really heartwarming is there is a revival going on in these colleges now. I mean, thousands of kids getting baptized. And that's really neat to see, because how far our upper education has fallen to see that, and the way things have gotten really perverted in the upper education. So adaptive evangelism. It's about letting go, learning as we go, and keep going. Letting go of everything that we used before. All the stuff we used to do before doesn't work. So we got to let that go, and we got to learn as we go, and we got to keep going. Adaptive work pays attention to the deeper underlying causes that keep a group, nice spelling here, perilously perched in a state of inaction. And I think that's kind of been our church. The things we always did wasn't working anymore, but we didn't know to do anything different, and I don't think we really knew why. We haven't really delved into why it's different. For churches, competing values like caring for longtime members versus reaching out to the unchurched assuring excellent in ministry versus increasing participation with more volunteers, assuring control and unity versus collaboration, and innovation entail conflict about things of equal value. And you know, one of the things I thought about is the conflict over our community dinner. You know, we've got this new community dinner. Well, you know, I've heard some people say, well, what about the church's Thanksgiving dinner? You know, and trying to let go of things that we've already done so we can do something different. Making hard decisions in the face of competing values is what every explorer confronts when they go off the map and into uncharted territory. Because of their relational congruence, the men became a core, and when they stepped off the map, they became a core of discovery requiring adaptive capacity. And I would argue that, you know, we're becoming a core of missionary because we're stepping out of Oak Ridge Church and we're becoming more missional. And, you know, by this and some of the other things we're doing is we're becoming more missional. And we're going to have to band together, just like we saw with the community lunch. We've got to band together and stay strong and follow what we're called to do. Adaptive capacity, the resilience of people and the capacity of systems to engage. Well, I'm sorry about that. I'll back up just for a second. Notice I changed the header a little bit. So we're going off the map. We ditched the canoes. We got a map there, but we're going off the map and we're going into uncharted territory. And like we talked before, you know, these are experiments. You know, all this stuff, all these ideas we come up with, those are experiments. And we got to figure what works for our community, what works for our church and our community. Adaptive capacity, the resilience of people and the capacity of systems to engage in problem-defining and problem-solving work in the midst of adaptive pressure and the resulting disequilibrium. A lot of big words, but that's what we've done. You know, we've done that by coming up with ideas on how we can reach our community and reach our community different than we were trying to do it before. When the world is different than we expected, we become disoriented. Tried and true solutions to our problems don't work and we get stuck. We are faced with competing values that demand a decision which will inevitably lead to loss. We can get overwhelmed. And you know, that's kind of where we're at, I believe, is we're kind of overwhelmed. We don't really have a clear vision, you know, and I think we were set up, and I just got to give it to God's wisdom, when we went through the whole United Methodist thing and leaving the United Methodist, it brought our church together. You know, we came together and we went back to our core values and our core ideals and stood for what we believe in. And so now this is just the next stepping stone to really become what the church can become. The transformational church mobilizes a group towards the growth they will need in order to face the disorientation and find the capacity to reframe their shared identity and new expression of their shared mission. And that's what we're trying to do, is just try to reframe and come up with how we can follow our shared mission. And so I'm on page 93 at the full paragraph at the bottom if you want to follow along. My book's all highlighted and torn and everything. And I got lazy. I didn't want to type this whole paragraph, so I thought I would read it. So down at the first full paragraph at the bottom of page 93. This is the Canoeing the Mountains moment. This was when the core of discovery faced for the first time the breadth of challenges posed by the Rocky Mountains and came to the irrefutable reality that there was no Northwest Passage, no navigable water route to the Pacific Ocean. This is the moment when they had to leave their boats, find horses, and make the giant adaptive shift that comes from realizing their mental models for the terrain in front of them were wrong. And you know, and that's the moment I had when I read this book, is that, you know, the book made sense to me that what we're doing is not going to work because society is not the way it used to be. So adaptive capacity, a set of skills to be mastered. Calmly face the unknown. And the reason why for the pregnant pause on that is that's what we got to do. You know, we can't do gnashing of teeth. We can't stress over it. All we got to do is calmly face it. And really, from my view, is experiment. You know, we run experiments. We don't get upset if they don't work. If they don't work, we'll find something else. If they don't work, we'll try something else. You know, maybe it's the wrong time for that experiment and we'll revisit it. But we just do experiments. We'll calmly face it. We'll figure out ways to address the new ways. And, you know, God's on our side. We're not going to lose. Refuse quick fixes. And I think this is important. I don't, you know, there's no quick fixes in this. There's no, you know, and I'll argue with myself, oh, get these Bible tracts, we'll hand these out. That'll fix the church. There's no quick fixes, and I believe there's no one thing. I believe there's going to be multiple things that we're going to have to employ, and multiple things. And the bottom line, really, and Tammy said this, if we can reach one family, well, really, if, you know, the dinner, and I know, ladies, we have phenomenal cooks here, and I know it takes a lot of time to cook food. It's not just, you know, run get pizzas and throw them on the table. I know it takes a lot of time, but just think, if one soul was saved from all that effort, wouldn't it be worth it? Engage others in the learning and transformation necessary to take on the challenge that is before them. And that's what I'm trying to do here. That's why I wanted, and I was led to do this Bible book study, was to bring the church in and have the group decide that this is the direction we are led to go. As opposed to John Ryan saying, hey, this is the way I think the church should go. I think, and you know, and I tell Doris I missed her, because I love the fact Doris sat there and man, she was throwing out idea after idea after idea after idea, and I love that she was thinking that way and engaged, and I love that everybody's engaged in thinking that, hey, how can we reach our community? How can we you know, reach people for God? Seek new perspectives. And I think that's one of the things we always have to do. We have to learn. You know, because one of the things that when we go into this unknown and we're going off the map is we don't know what people believe about the church. You know, I watched a video the other day where this guy's explaining the reason he is Islam now and he's a Muslim is because of the Trinity. The Trinity confused him, so Christianity's too confusing, I'm going to be Muslim. Mind-blowing. But that's kind of my point on this new perspective. You know, so that gave me a new perspective that I need to be fully able to explain the Trinity and make sure somebody can really understand it and not get confused by it, because they might do something really stupid and go to Islam. You know, and I would have never, ever thought that in a million years, how the Trinity is confusing. Ask questions that reveal competing values and gaps in values and actions. Well, that's us in the church. We got to ask questions of each other, and we got to help each other grow, and we got to help each other, you know, see, and we got to support each other. You know, just like Dottie's doing the community thing. You know, if Celia comes up with something, we've got to support each other with these experiments and help each other out. It's like Will with his game night. You know, I'm not a big gamer, but you know, absolutely, if I can support him and maybe we can reach some kids, we'll see what we can do. Raise up deeper issues at work in the community. Absolutely, and I truly think this is the problem with our Hartsville political leaders, is there's deeper issues in our community they're not addressing. The one main one that we all know is drugs. There's a lot of drugs in this community and a lot of drug addicts in this community. Now, reaching them for the church, I don't know that we're prepared for that. Now, we can direct people to the right people that have that thing. I know Mike's got a couple resources, and we've got people in churches that we can reach out to send folks to, but that's not, for at least for the drug addicts, that's not something our church can really address at this time. Maybe at some other time we might have do some meetings and stuff. Explore and confront resistance and sabotage. There's going to be resistance and sabotage. People don't like to change. It's against our nature. We do not like to change, and people don't like to change, and so there's going to be some resistance. Just like I said, I heard some resistance on the Thanksgiving dinner already. That we're not doing a Thanksgiving dinner, but we're going to do it for other people. I've already heard about some resistance on the Thanksgiving dinner. Help the congregation make hard, often painful decisions to effectively fulfill our mission in a changing context. And that's what we're doing here. Is we're learning the thing, and we're trying to figure out how we can make decisions so we can fulfill our mission at Oak Ridge Methodist Church. And on that note, the mission isn't my mission. This is the mission we decided on when we left UMC. We as a congregation decided this is our mission, is that we're going to evangelize and make disciples. And so that's, as I've said before, I'm an Army guy. You give me a mission, I'm going to try to accomplish the mission. That's my goal. I've got to accomplish the mission. Lewis and Clark could have turned back. Hey, we made it all the way mountains. We made it to the mouth of the river. There's not a river that runs to the Pacific Ocean. Hey, President, we're good. We accomplished the mission. There's no way. But no, they kept going. They kept going, and they gave back. And we'll get to that in just a minute. By recommitment to our core ideology. By continuing on, we recommit to our core ideology. So, and that's just by doing this. We're committed to our core ideology. And our mission. We're already thinking about it. We're working towards that mission. The core ideology is both a character and an identity statement. This is who we are. We're a missional church that wants to build disciples. That's who we are. We're doing it in the Wesley Methodist way, but that's who we are. The Corps of Discovery was a military expedition with a mission to fulfill. They were a corps, and they were a corps of discoveries. This was their mission and their identity. Lewis and Clark's enduring respect and fame was because they had a passionate purpose that went beyond personal gain. And I thought, well, that's, soldiers, they're not trying to get promoted. They're not trying to make more money. They had a passion, and we'll see some of these about them. They had a passion to help out humanity, to grow the knowledge of humanity. Well, I would argue that ours is easy. We have a passion to bring people to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. We've got that, that's our core. And so I think for us, our purpose is easy. It's for Jesus Christ. But a lot of times we let our flesh get in the way. Meriwether Lewis' reflection from his 31st birthday journal and he's so young, I think about 31, man, he was a baby. Didn't know anything. Meriwether Lewis' reflection from his 31st birthday journal entry after he crossed over the Lemhi Pass. I reflected that I had done but little, very little indeed, to further the happiness, that should be an H, the happiness of the human race, or to advance the information of the succeeding generation, and resolved in the future to live for mankind as heretofore I've lived for myself. And see, that's kind of what I think. And I would put this in church terms. I think over the past few years, and I'm going to be a generalist, this is a general comment, so don't shoot me. But I think over the past few years, Oak Ridge Methodist Church lived for Oak Ridge Methodist Church. We lived to serve ourselves. We didn't live to go outside to the community and live for mankind. I would argue, talking with Preachy, Preachy said, well, this is a sending church. And I said, a sending church? He said, yeah, you send money and let somebody else do it. Mm-hmm. Let somebody else get their hands dirty. Mm-hmm. And so, I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of sending money to Guatemala to build a house, or sending money to Mexico to build a house, but not get my hands dirty. Their commitment to these purposes, which transcend the mere worldly aspirations of power, glory, ego, or money, shines through their journals, and it's clear they affected virtually every action and decision that Lewis and Clark made. And I thought about that. I put myself in their position. If I was in their position, knowing what I know, and they didn't know what I know as far as the West and everything, shoot, I'd be going to California looking for gold because nobody's made it there. You know, you can just think of the gold in the mountains and, you know, silver in Nevada. You know, but they didn't have that. They wanted to build maps so people could figure out how to go west. They were more looking at mankind instead of getting rich. They weren't trying to name, you know, massive mountains after themselves. They didn't have that ego. They were just trying to help out mankind. What are we really called to do? Is it merely to get more people in church pews, dollars in the offering plate so our congregation can keep offering religious services to those who desire them? Is that what God's called us to do? Is leading the church nothing more than survival? And, you know, and as I was thinking that, you know, if that's what's leading church, you guys need to fire me as the chairman of the board because we're not surviving very well. You know, if we look at the numbers of people that have, you know, gone into homes or died off or, you know, left, we're not doing very good at survival. Why do we exist as a congregation, institution, or organization? What would be lost in our community in our world if Oak Ridge Methodist Church ceased to be a church? You know, I think my wife always corrects me, Bassham, as I drive by it, and the doors are closed and nothing's going on. You know, and that's what we would be. We'd just be the doors closed, here's an old church, and people continue to drive by it every day. What purpose and principles must we protect as central to our identity? And that's what we talked about, you know, and I think these would be good as maybe a follow-up. I think there's some things we definitely need to discuss, but as I was thinking it, you know, core to a central identity is the inerrant, infallible Word of God. That's what we believe in the Bible, and we're Wesleyan Methodist. And, you know, and I'm sure there's more, but, you know, those are the things we need to think about that are central to what our church is and what we do. What are we willing to let go so the mission will continue? Let go of Thanksgiving dinner so that we can reach our community? That seems like a small price to pay for me, you know. If we can reach our community, if we can, you know, bring people to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. Reframing strategy. Lewis and Clark reframed their strategy with a recommitment to core ideology, values, and mission. And then I believe that's what we're doing. I truly do. I believe we're reframing what actions, what things we need to do to now with this new world order, basically, on how we can meet our mission as a church. A way of looking at the challenge before us through a different lens and seeing it differently, finding the possibilities for a new way of being. And so, you know, one of the things I like to do is rephrase the way I think about things, because, you know, if we think about post-Christendom and the church, we could easily get overwhelmed. We could easily we're an older church. We can't reach young people. We're older members. We can't. My daughter was telling me about her and their church in Missouri would go and clean up people's yards for them. We don't have backs for that. That's not us. But I believe God can do anything, you know, and just like as we do some of these things, as we look at it, you know, I believe no good purpose that we do for God with a clean heart is gonna fail. You know, I believe He can bless it, and we may never know what blessings that happen, but you know, I used to teach. I'm a digress a little bit, but I used to teach 9th grade Sunday school. And so I always liked to teach 9th grade Sunday school because that was the hardest year for me. You know, when making that transition from middle school to high school, you're going through puberty and all that stuff, and you know, trying to figure out who you are. That was a hard year for me. And so, but you know, that's a hard year for many teens, especially once they get in high school. They fall out of church a lot, but to me, I try to make things a challenge to myself. And so, you know, and that's the way I look at this now. This is a challenge before our church. You know, a challenge to figure out how to be successful doing things differently. Because what we're doing is not successful. But the other thing I think about, and in this case, it's way easier, is we got God on our side. How can we lose? I mean, as we learned today in Sunday school, Jesus prayed for us. And that's just mind-blowing to me. Jesus prayed for me. Not even knowing who I am, he prayed for me. Facing this missional moment, the reframing of church strategy from a sanctuary-centered, membership-based, religious and life-sent service provider. A lot of big words, but really that's what we were. We were a church where people came in, they, just like we talked about in Lesson 3, Mike reminded us all of the great things God said and had out for us. But unfortunately, now with society, we're not reminding anybody of anything. We're telling them for the first time. It's a much more missionary purpose. To a local, this is where our strategy is changing. We're becoming a local mission outpost for furthering the kingdom of God, enabling our congregation to discover a faithful expression of our corporate identity in a changing world. No longer does society support church life or give preference to Christian tradition. You know, I remember when I was in, well, not when I was in school, but when my children were in school and small, a lot of times the coaches would say, oh, we can't have practice on Wednesday night because a lot of people go to church. People said that in the last 20 years, 25 years. You know, they don't recognize church or the church tradition. Not like we did before. A reframe itself is only a new way of seeing and describing the problem. And the book brings out, this is as far as many missional congregations get. But I think the important part here is not to get overwhelmed, not to stress about it. We just have to come up with new strategies and realize that the world's different. The world's different, okay, fine. God has not changed. God has not lost his power. He's the same he was. He's the same every day. And he's got us. We just got to put forth the effort. And God's got us. And I don't believe, and I will argue with, I think I copied that slide. I thought I got the duplicates out of here. I will argue that we're already stepping out because we're experimenting. We're already stepping up to the plate and come up with different ways to do things differently. New learning. At the heart of adaptation is new learning. Missional initiatives so the author brings this up as some things that some churches brought up, and some of these are pretty wild to me. Build a gym. I know my daughter and their new church down in Florida, that's what they're doing. And I think their gymnasium's like almost $3 million that they're building. They're building a church youth center way out in the middle of nowhere, so it lives off the dirt road. But they have half the money already. So, you know, maybe that'll work for them in their area. Bring in a rock band. I know that's what Celia wants, but I think I don't think that will work very well for our church. Give away C.S. Lewis books. You know, I truly don't think that you could hand somebody a book that you just met and really change their life. I think you've got to invest some time, you've got to talk to them, and maybe if they start asking questions and yearning, then they could read a book. Hire a new pastor. Fire the current pastor. Change the name of the church. And I know on this church there was a lot of discussion about Dottie's Community Church. It got shut
Mike,
down.
you better watch out, Dottie's liable to fire you.
I've been trying to get fired.
Designing a cooler website. Yeah, our website stinks, but we have a website. And it works. These are all just technical solutions. They're just, and technical solutions are bad. If we can effectively implement it and it works, it's an experiment. We need to look beyond technical solutions by becoming a learning church. We need to learn our area. We need to learn, and I think part of that learning is going to be the experimentation. What works in our community? What works for our church? Because obviously, like I brought up before, going and working in somebody's yard doing backbreaking work, Gina and I can barely move today just pulling up her flowers. I can't imagine having to go to somebody else's yard that might be in worse shape. As they entered uncharted territory, they had to start learning again, adjusting their expectations. At that moment, their core became a collaboration. And so collaboration is where everybody works together. No idea is dumb. We work together, we'll work together for experiments, and we'll work together to reach our community. And I thought about this, in their position, and I really want to go read their biography now. But in their position, they had these canoes. So did they trade the Indians the canoes for the horses? I don't know. I imagine so. They quit carrying canoes. I know that they reached out to the Indians to help survive in that cold weather because they weren't used to that cold weather. They're not used to the West and all that crazy stuff in the West. They got Sacagawea, and she helped them out, and they had, they had to use what was there, and they had to embrace, and I can see, young people in the community helping us figure out how we're going to approach the community. Chapter 8. If you guys got this one was kind of funny to me. My Italian grandfather was killing me, and my name for this chapter is same old, not working. And so the idea for this chapter was, and what does this have to do with the church? Well, his Italian grandfather, Italian men were dying of heart attacks between 60 and 65 because of the diet. And so he said, his dying grandfather could cook like nobody's belief, and he really loves the Italian food, but he had to put himself on a diet from the Italian food because his Italian grandfather was killing him, if you didn't read it. That's my paraphrase of the chapter. And so the author talks about, he had somebody raise their hand in the middle of a service and say, hey, what does all this business stuff have to do to the church? Now, we're all not young here, but I hate to break it to you, the church is a business. We got to have positive cash flow so we keep the doors open, keep the lights on, and keep our buildings and insurance and all that good stuff. It's terrible, but the church is a business. His retort to this guy is, this isn't business, it's biology. And so, if we look at the business aspects of things, how are we going to keep the church doors open? Get more people? Well, how are we going to get more people? So you can't look at this from a business mind, and I like his biology example. God has designed all aspects of life, including corporate life, communities, families, organizations, and churches, to adapt and thrive in changing environments. And one of the things I thought about was our wonderful pastor. He was telling me about being a kid, he got paid to go get beavers, go get rid of beavers. So, our brilliant fishing game came up with the idea of bringing alligators in. Figuring the alligators are going to die off in the cold, right? No, they adapted. The alligators adapted. So that's biology. So we just got to look at the adaptive nature, and I'll pick on my mom. June and I were up at Mom's house like 3 years ago in February. It was negative 28.7 degrees on the thermometer. I was looking at the thing on her wall, and I took a picture of it. And outside thinking, goodness gracious, people aren't meant to be living up this high and that cold. But they adapted. I mean, they adapted and, knew when not to go in cold. They had all kinds of weather. Fortunately, their snowmobiles had heated grips and other stuff, but they adapted. And that's all we're doing now is we're going to adapt to a changing environment around us as the city of Hartsville, Decatur, North Alabama changes. Adaptation, the way living human systems learn to adapt to a changing environment so they can fulfill their purpose for being. And so that's all we're going to do is we're going to just adapt to our surroundings, adapt to our new environment so we can do our mission. We can evangelize and make disciples. Leadership vision. So I remember Amina said, well, I got to this, not this chapter, but a couple of chapters back. She goes, I got to that chapter and I saw that leadership junk and it reminded me of work. Well, I hate to break it to you, everybody in here, we're all leaders in one way or another. Everybody in this room is a leader, not from the perspective that, hey, you're the church pastor, but you lead small groups, you lead Sunday school, you lead music, we're all leaders in some capacity, and people look up to this room, look up to the people represented in this room in our church. The first responsibility of a leader is to define reality. And perhaps one of the most important of reality that must first be defined is reality that every organism functions within a larger system. And that's an easy one because, if you look at Oak Ridge Methodist Church, we're part of AIM. AIM's a larger system. Where Oak Ridge is the little Oak Ridge communities, part of Hartsville, Alabama, which is part of the state of Alabama, which is in the United States. We're all part of a larger system. But all that stuff has an effect on our church. Energizing community people towards their own transformation in order to accomplish the shared mission in the face of a changing world. And that's what we're trying to do. That's what I'm trying to do. That's what Brother Mike's trying to do, is we're trying to energize the Oak Ridge Methodist Church community towards our own transformation. That way we can follow our shared mission as this world's changing all around us. Because the church is the body in Christ, in order to lead it, we must be able to see and lead the church as a living system. And think about it. A lot of you, like my wife and, everybody in this room pretty much, except for me, and maybe my mom, you guys grew up here. You guys know the background, you know the history of the church, you know the good and the bad. Uncle Kyle is going to walk me around the church and show me all the different things of where everything's hidden under the ground and what they've done to the church. You guys, have been here and known the church. But also, you guys know how much the church has changed. I hear all the time from June talking about how the teenagers grew up in the first couple of pews all the time. And how they had, a bunch of kids in the church. And now that's changed. And so, the one thing we've always said is the only constant is change. Because, everything's going to change, whether our bodies change, whether our finances change, whether our churches change, whether our community change. The only constant's change. And it's just how we address it, how we deal with it, and how we work with it to better and meet our mission. The system, the code, and 3 questions to consider. A local congregation is not just a collection of individual people, but also the love, commitment, and values and the mission they share. And I read this a few times and had to think about this one, but, because I always think of the church as, well, there's this family or this person, or, that's how I frame the church when I think about it. But, I started thinking about, the commitment and values and the mission that we share, commitment. Celia and I got to ride up, and when we saw the superintendent, and we talked a lot before we were going to see the superintendent, and see her heart and her drive for the community of Christ. You know, and just her love of this church and everything she does. And we've got a whole church full of this type of people, a whole church of family members. And I will argue that every person in the church, I can't tell you one that wants something bad for the church. Everybody loves this church and wants us to be able to meet our mission. The relationship between the parts as they're fulfilling their purpose is even more important than the parts itself. And I kind of always think of, and I apologize, I'm not a mathematician, but I am an engineer and I mess with math a whole lot. I'm probably the only person in this room that's messed with sine, cosine, and tangent in the last 30 days. Because it's part of my job. I tell you all that because it's exponential. You know, the work I can do as one person, if I have 2 or 3 more, it's not 2 or 3 more people, it becomes exponential. So instead of, 2 plus 2 is 4, it's 2 to the second, or, 2 to the third, and, we can do the work of 8 people, or we can affect 8 people. It's an exponential. So, the work and the relationship of us working together is more important than just the one person. When the members, the relationships, and the mission of the church are aligned and working symbiotically towards a shared purpose, the church functions well. Duh. If we don't have any infighting, we don't have anything going on. That's kind of the duh moment, yeah. There's both a commitment to the depth and authenticity and space to welcome new people. There's an ability to accept people as they are and to be continually transformed into the likeness of Christ. And so I think about this church, and we've had visitors come in every now and again, and they're mobbed. Everybody's welcoming them. Everybody's encouraging them, and that's great. And hopefully they feel really well. I do think that as far as our church goes, there's the reluctance on some people to go deep, to really go deep in the Word and really go deep in relationships and really go deep in their lives. I think they just want the top part, and don't make me think about the stuff I'm not supposed to be doing. I don't want to get into the hard stuff. I want to do the easy stuff. 3 key questions we need to wrestle with. What DNA is essential and must be preserved? And we've already talked about this quite a bit. As far as our Wesleyan heritage, we're going to follow the inerrant, infallible Word of God. What DNA must be discarded? Well, the UMC. We're not gonna mess with that sort of thing. And there may be other things that come up that we will have to make a conscious decision whether or not that's good or bad for our church and good or bad for our mission. What new DNA needs to be created through experimentation? I'm going to argue a very large one is missional. We have to become a missional church. That has to become part of our DNA. And I'm not saying go out on the street and hand out tracts. If you want to do that, let's go for it. But we've got to be a missional church. We've got to come out with ways of getting out there and reaching people, because they're just not flooding our doors. They're not busting the doors down to come hear Mike preach. That's because they have never heard Mike preach, but they're not busting the doors down to hear Mike preach. If we follow our old strategies, we're canoeing without rivers once again. And that's what we have to, as leaders of the church, we have to be very cognizant of not allowing the church to slip back into the old methods. Oh, well, we'll have new music. People will want to come to our church then. Get a new pastor. People want to come to our church then. We've had guest pastors. We've had all kinds of different music. Nothing's changing. To learn and adapt, we need new creative experiments in relationships and purposes. That experiment word again. Then we are experimenting with new solutions within a living system. We're doing so with something that has a history, alive and precious, and must be handled with care. And I thought about the, you know, the history of Oak Ridge Methodist Church as we were going through the whole UMC thing, that, you know, looking at the deeds to the land all the way back to 1861 for this area, for where our church sits in. You know, this church has a proud heritage that's been here. And, you know, we got to keep that alive, and that's precious. And, you know, we got to handle that with care, but we also have to do our mission. And we have to evangelize our community, and we have to make disciples. That's all I have. Comments, questions, other than Celia's rock band?
I do have a question. You mentioned that we've had visitors and that everybody flocked back and welcomed them, but they haven't come back. Why?
Yeah.
Good question. Well, I think I can tell you one. I think one was just using us for money. You know, the one had kind of a receding hairline, skinnier guy, said his fingers were messed up, he couldn't work and couldn't pay his bills. We paid his bills, never seen him.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he was just using us for money.
But there's been others too.
Yeah, you know, I honestly don't know. I don't know what the answer is, you know, and it may not be an us problem. It may be a them problem. You know, there's just so many things. The only thing that I can rely on. The thing that I rely on is God's grace and God's mission. If we're following God's mission and we're doing our very best at God's mission, we're not going to fail. God's going to make sure we succeed.
I think sometimes on that, we fail to follow up because we don't get their information. Mm-hmm. And then we don't know how to reach out to them.
I agree. You know, maybe that's visitor cards. There's visitor cards in the pews, and so they can fill it out.
It's in the bulletin, but they don't.
Right.
You know, there again, I think maybe if we designated one person to be in charge of that, you know.